Hello and welcome to the Weichert Report's next uh, video blog. I'm Brandon Weichert, founder and CEO of the Weichert Report. The drink tonight is Johnnie Walker Black label, and tonight we're going to be talking about a very somber and solemn topic. That is the current developments in Aleppo and the general Syrian Civil War. It would seem that the slaughter of people in Syria, innocent people, is seemingly endless. And there's been a lot of talk about what's going on in Syria and the larger implications for it. And there's been a lot of talk about how President-elect Donald Trump may be in cahoots or unduly influenced by the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. And I have to say that I'm pretty much sick of it. I'm pretty much sick of hearing it. Here's the lowdown. I wrote an article not long ago at American Greatness on this issue. I will be linking to it in the description of the video of this video. Basically, first of all, there is no Trump-Russia connection. And second of all, the real tragedy here is that the incoming President of the United States has been put into a position by his predecessor where Russia has, very much so, the geostrategic upper hand against the United States in the Middle East, which is a region that had been relatively closed off to Russian influence since the 1970s. This is not the fault of any Republican that ran in 2016. This is not President-elect Trump's. Whatever your opinion on him is, this is a ridiculous thing that's going on. The real story is the fact that what was supposed to be a pretty open and closed book collapse of another Arab strongman, Bashar al-Assad, has gone on to be a 5-year civil war that is on par, if not supersedes, the kind of chaos and destruction that the Spanish Civil War exhibited 80 years ago. Aleppo is about to fall, if it hasn't already, to the joint Assad-Alawite Russian and Iranian forces. It will. The Assad regime is solidifying its power. Now, I am no fan of Bashar al-Assad. The Assad family has been a consistent enemy of my country for decades. It's also somewhat tragic that Bashar al-Assad, the British-trained ophthalmologist turned dictator, came into power in Damascus in the year 2000 talking about liberalization and reform. And my, have we come full circle from that. I never really believed that the son of Haifa's Assad was capable of liberalization or reform, despite him having lived in a posh British London suburb, making oodles of money, being a high-end ophthalmologist. I never believed that he was capable of that. It's a tragedy, though, what's going on there. But this is not only an internal Syrian affair, but this is also a symbol of the failure of U.S. foreign policy for the last decade, and it's also a reminder of what happens when a superpower such as the U.S. creates strategic gaps in its grand strategy, for which the unlikeliest of actors to not just exploit, but to truly prosper. Um, in 2011, when the Arab Spring was sweeping across the region, and after the fall of Gaddafi, uh, which you can read my other pieces on the Arab Spring and on Libya, and my views on that issue. Um, when Syria began, what started as peaceful protests rapidly devolved because of government overreaction on the part of Assad into what it is today. Now, at the outset, the U.S. had the capability to intervene with a modest level of force and a modest level of financial investment to get a lot out of it. As in, if we are really serious about toppling dictators, which apparently is the Bush Obama foreign policy in the Middle East, if we're truly serious about toppling secular dictators, uh, we should have followed through then in the beginning of the Syrian Civil War, in order to prevent the kind of bloodshed and chaos that's been allowed to reign. But the Obama administration opted not to. They opted to basically, after toppling an ally, Hosni Mubarak, and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, after toppling Gaddafi, who was cooperating since the Iraq invasion in 2003, was a cooperative, potentially even ally, as terrible as he was, of the U.S. We've gone about toppling these regimes that actually were nominal friends of ours, in favor of supporting movements that seem to be elevating jihadist, Islamist groups into power, which are distinctly not our friends. So let's cut over to Syria. In Syria, you had the U.S. with a pristine opportunity, a limited time though, to get involved responsibly and to act to mitigate the disaster, and to potentially even, who knows, possibly even remove Assad. Although I still think a better solution would have been to do kind of Dayton Accord, redux with the competing factions, ethno-religious factions of Syria. Of course, we would have had to do it quickly because we didn't want the radicals to take over, and which is exactly what happened. And we didn't want to have Assad become completely up against the wall as he was, and without leaving him a way out. So, in that failure, we now have the inevitable ultimate result of a disastrous foreign policy. Who's going to stand to benefit? Well, obviously Assad, the Alawites. Iran is going to stand to benefit significantly because Assad is their client. They use Syria as a bridge into Lebanon, which is a critical geostrategic point for Iranian-backed terror groups like Hezbollah to launch ceaseless attacks into Israel. It's a boon for Russia. Not only are they securing their small but long-term holdings in Latakia Air Base and Tartus Naval Base, which they're expanding upon. Also, they are humiliating the U.S. They are now getting closer to the Iranian regime. They are protecting a key client in Assad. They're also further destabilizing the region, which is in their favor because the region is tilted toward the U.S., generally speaking. The governments are. And with the insertion of greater Russian influence, I believe Putin's hope is that maybe he can start isolating the U.S. from that part of the world. Putin is also preventing the expansion of neo-Ottomanist Turkey under Erdogan from really gaining a new strategic foothold. At least he's forcing Erdogan to align closer with Russia rather than against it, which is a big geopolitical boon for Putin, who is a neo-Eurasianist, as we discussed in the previous video blog, as well as in 3 or 4 different articles on the Weichert Report. You will be able to read those in the links that I provide. They give great background, but basically Putin is trying to secure his borders, his periphery, in order to prevent the U.S. from creating alliances that will buffer Russia's expansion. And Syria is a great case study because at the same time that America's role is being diminished, Russia's is increasing. Furthermore, what Russia is doing, because of the fact that America did not intervene immediately. Remember General Petraeus, when he was in government, even Secretary Clinton, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't remember though, I think she was in favor of it, were advocating for an increased U.S. role in Syria to prevent the destabilization that's going on now. President Obama and Ben Rhodes and the like chose not to do that. Fine, that's their prerogative, but now we're paying the price for it because all this talk about Russia feeling their oats, as it were, around the world, one of the reasons they are is because of the fact that they've been so effective in Syria against the U.S. and our rebel groups. There's another problem here also, though. And that's the problem in that who our allies are in the region, in Syria. We are ostensibly supporting rebel factions that we believe are anti-Assad, well, they are anti-Assad and pro-democracy, pro-West. And they nominally are. But as Andrew McCarthy over at National Review has rightly documented, covert attempts on the part of the U.S. and its allies to, for instance, smuggle weapons from Libya through Turkey to the Free Syrian Army. It turns out we are not quite sure that elements that we're giving the weapons to are in fact friendly to us. And in fact, they may actually be affiliated with jihadist networks that are operating in Syria, and notably the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, otherwise known as ISIS, or Daesh, which I hate that term, by the way. The IS, the Islamic State. It's a failure of American policy. We don't know who we're dealing with. And so one of the reasons I think that the Russians are being so effective is because they've aligned with the standing government of Syria, and the minority Alawite community that runs Syria is not going to give up the country without a fight to the death, because this is an ethnic and religious battle. You don't surrender in those. You just either you push on or you die. And so Aleppo is the kind of ultimate inevitable end of a failed U.S. foreign policy in the region. And our support of groups in Syria is proving to be not well informed, to say the least. What should have happened was that if the U.S. was serious about preventing what happened in Syria and possibly, if not removing Assad, then minimizing his influence in Syrian politics, we should have intervened directly. in 2011, but that window closed a long time ago. So the argument that we're going to be able to go forward now and create a situation that is in our interest is ridiculous. And that's not because Donald Trump or any other person in the Republican Party or elsewhere in government, in the U.S. government, is pro-Russia. It's simply because the Obama administration failed to act in a decisive manner. Now, we're at a stage now where I believe Assad is likely, if not going to win the civil war, Assad is likely going to prevent anyone else from winning the Syrian Civil War. The next step for America is we've got to try to salvage this thing, and that's not going to be with the introduction of U.S. forces now. God forbid. The notion that's being, I hear this at events and meetings that I have in D.C. where these hardliners come swinging in saying that, oh, we need to create an air defense zone, and oh, we need to prevent Russian planes from flying over. And I'm with Dana Rohrabacher on this. Well, are you going to condone U.S. forces shooting down Russian planes and living with the fact that at that point we're at war with a nuclear-armed Russia? And Vladimir Putin, by the way, the Russians, as I've documented here, has a preemptive nuclear doctrine. We don't. And he's a trigger-happy guy. So I'm going to tell you right now, the notion that we should introduce U.S. forces now and that we should, basically try to roll back the Assad Iranian-Russian force is absurd. It's ridiculous. You're talking about a world war there. It's not something that we can do. What's going on there is a humanitarian disaster. It is the result of evil men, not just Assad or the Russians or the Iranians, but the jihadists also, the Islamic State, al-Nusra, and all the others. It is a sickening thing that's going on, and it could have been mitigated. I don't know. I don't believe it could have been prevented, but it could have been mitigated. Again, had the Obama administration listened to people like Dave Petraeus and intervened even modestly, even in 2013 during the whole chemical weapons issue, had the U.S. the French Warsboring did a great warsboring.com did a great article, I think back in 2014, which basically French Rafale fighters were airborne over Syria in anticipation for Barack Obama's announcement that we were going to blitz the bejesus out of Assad from the air, and it never happened. Obama punted in the 11th hour. Made us look terrible. Made us look weak. Encouraged. That was the point in which the Russians intervened. It's not because Donald Trump tweeted that he wanted to make a deal with Putin, potentially. It's because Barack Obama did not do the right thing. He didn't lead. So the notion that there's Russian influence, the U.S. election, and that Donald Trump is going to be a puppet is ridiculous. And all you need to do is look at what's going on in Syria. That's not the result of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is going to have to pick up the pieces now over there. The only thing we can do is make a deal. We're not going to, God help us if we introduce, what are we going to do introducing U.S. forces there? You're talking about involving us in a war against the Russians, which we don't need. Russia is not threatening us directly over there. They're a pain in the neck. I've said this elsewhere. They are what the French were to the British, the Russians are to the United States today. They are a continual thorn in our side. They are a constant spoiler. If necessary, over real strategic interests, national interests, the U.S. might have to one day, God help us, fight the Russians. But we shouldn't be seeking to over specks of islands in the the Kuril Island chain in the Pacific, or over Syria. We should be much more serious in our definition of what the national interests are, particularly when it comes to fighting a major nuclear power like Russia. So in Syria, what you're going to witness is this. I think you're going to see the Assad regime retaining power. I think you're going to see momentum generated for them. I think this is going to be the, if not the one of the top 5 greatest humanitarian disasters in history. I think it will continue to destabilize Europe, which will in turn begin to have negative effects on the U.S. Over the long term. Do not expect, when the Assad regime does declare victory, don't expect uh, the crisis in Europe to end. Don't expect Russia to go home happy. Don't expect the Iranians to be placated. This is only going to get worse. And so the U.S. needs to step up now and try to formulate a deal. And it's a power sharing agreement. It's the only thing we've got. And so the sooner we do this, the better. I think right now it's going to be tough, but I just don't understand what the other alternative is. Are we seriously going to introduce U.S. forces? And the answer is no. So all of this talk about standing up to Russia and Syria, it just makes us look weak. And it reminds the world that the world's greatest military power is incapable and or unwilling to live up to its stated red lines, enforcing its stated red lines, which just is really bad. So this is a failure of the Obama administration. This is a failure of understanding the Russian intentions. This is not an example of Donald Trump and his actions recently. You know, and the desire, at least the stated desire, to have more positive relations with Russia. It's not indicator or indicative of some great Russian plot. And the election in 2016 was not the result of Donald Trump being a Kremlin plant. Far from it. The Obama administration has dropped the ball. And Syria is another example of the failed Obama doctrine of leading from behind. And so I think that we're going to have to, for the next at least 2 years, really basically be playing as a country catch up with the rest of the world, undoing the mistakes of the last administration. Actually, let's to be fair, the last 3 or 4 administrations, going back to H.W. Bush. It's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be perfect. And I think there's always going to be something people can find wrong, but ultimately, this situation in Syria needs to be resolved. We need to accept that Russia is going to have a prolonged impact there. Assad is likely to stay. The Alawites are certainly going to remain in power. And in terms of Iran, they're the real threat in the region. IS and Al Qaeda and the Wahhabists, they are also the real threat in the region. But we can manage and defeat them. Iran is going to be more difficult. We can defeat them as well, but the costs are going to be far greater. And so we need to always keep the regional, to use a Soviet term, the regional correlation of forces in our minds. And we need to understand that the number one threat to America and its allies in the region is Iran. The number 2 threat is the Wahhabist networks that we're fighting. And that's how we need to proceed. The stuff in Syria is a grotesque sideshow in terms of the grand strategy, and we're going to need to resolve it quickly. And if that means a power sharing agreement, then I'm all in for it. We need to just make a deal and move on, because there are people who are being slaughtered. And I am not going to defend Assad, but I will say this. In terms of the cosmopolitan, progressive viewpoint, as brutal and disgusting and especially now genocidal. But before the Syrian Civil War began, Damascus, which is the center of his power, the capital of Syria, was a bastion of, for that region, progressive thought. Um, Anybody who's been to Damascus understands that, or anybody who knows much about Damascus already knows this, but you know, prostitution was okay. Um, homosexual relations were part of life there. They may not have been advertised, but it was just, that was life there. Gambling was legal. There are a litany of kind of sacred cows in Islamic orthodoxies that were not respected in Damascus because of the Assad regime being a secular regime predominantly. So there is, I think, in the pecking order, Assad's a really evil, terrible guy, but I don't know if he's as evil or terrible as the jihadists that were fighting, or as terrible as the Iranian government is. The Iranian government is the problem, obviously. The people I don't have a problem with. That is what we're facing here. Syria needs to be resolved immediately. And it's not going to be resolved with American forces going in. That is the worst possible option. It's doable. It just means that we're going to lose a lot of people, and the economy is going to be busted apart, and we're probably going to be looking at a world war. So let's not do that. Let's have a power sharing agreement. Let's try to do that, and recognize that Russia, unfortunately, is now going to be a serious player in that region for some time. My prayers and thoughts are with the people of Aleppo and the people who have been suffering. And we are, at the Weichert Report, hoping for a quick and reasonable and speedy end to this conflict. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking a little bit about tripolarity and the Russian-U.S.-Chinese relationship, so be on the lookout for that. For the Weichert Report, Merry Christmas, God bless. I'm Brandon Weichert, and thank you for watching. Cheers, and let's keep Syria in our prayers, and the people of Syria in our prayers. Thank you.